Hello, and welcome to a Pokemon XD Yellow Darkness video, where today we're going to be completing the game with the duo of Heracross and Pinsir. And I really have no history with these two. Heracross I only really know from the anime, and Pinsir I only briefly used at the end of the Bugs Only video, so I don't really have a good gauge of how either of these Pokemon will do, so maybe we can get a little more information from their stats and move pool. So starting with Heracross, it has 80 HP, 125 attack, 75 defense, 40 special attack, 95 special defense, and 85 speed, making it fairly fast, really strong, and also surprisingly bulky. Now moving on to Pinsir, it has 65 HP, 125 attack, 100 defense, 55 special attack, 70 special defense, and 85 speed. So they're matched in attack and speed, however Pinsir is quite a bit lower in the HP. To compensate for this, it does have a much higher defense stat of 100, so they should be taking attacks relatively well. Now to go over their moves, because they're very similar, mostly normal and fighting type moves, and also Earthquake, which is quite nice. Now Heracross does actually get Mega Horn at level 53, which is important because until that point, neither of these Pokemon can naturally hit Ghost types, so unfortunately I will have to rely on Mimic and Hidden Power a little later down the line to actually deal that damage. Which is really unfortunate because if I roll a bad Hidden Power type or a special attacking Hidden Power type, they could struggle. Now one thing to note is that Heracross is actually part fighting type, which is a bit of a blessing and a curse, because fighting gives it a lot more resistances. However, it does give it a 4 times weakness to flying, which is a fairly common type in the game, so hopefully it doesn't come up too often. But there's a good chance that out of the blue it will just get taken out of a fight. But with that, let's go ahead and move on to our Heracross in particular, which has a quirky nature, which is unfortunately a neutral nature, but at least Heracross is already naturally strong, so it shouldn't hurt it too much. It gets access to the amazing Guts ability, which raises its attack if it's poisoned, burned, or paralyzed, which could come in handy if I need extra power at any point in the game. However, it does come at the drawback of obviously taking the effects that the statuses give. And at level 10, it gets Tackle, Leer, and Horn Attack. So with that, we go ahead and move over to our Pinsir, who has a Careful nature, raising its special defense but lowering its special attack, which is honestly a good nature, because it is a little lower on the special defense side, and it's not going to use the special attack at all. It gets Hyper Cutter, preventing my attack from being lowered, which could definitely come in handy, especially with the amount of Intimidate Pokemon around, and it gets Vice Grip, Focus Energy, and Bind by level 10. So with that, we make quick work of the early game, taking down the old man with relative ease, and that brings us straight to the Power Rangers, where I decide to fight Grain today because none of his Pokemon really do that much damage to them other than his Shadow Pokemon, possibly. Anyway, let's just do a little bit of rambling. If you are enjoying this video so far, consider liking, and if you have any Pokemon suggestions, please put them down below. Now, I do have some very important news, and that is I'm almost up to my 100th video. I believe this one marks number 97, so in just a few weeks, I will hit 100. Now, I already have the video all planned out, and I already have the run completed as well, so that's already all taken care of. But I think with episode 100 coming around the corner, I just wanted to ask, since it's been a while, what are your opinions on these videos and what improvements should I make? At the moment, I think that video titles, thumbnails, and stat screens could probably still use a bit more work, though that does sometimes just come down to how creative I'm feeling that day. Volume has also increased quite a bit since even just a few months ago, so I want to know if I'm maybe going a little too high on that. And then videos and pacing is all stayed about the same, so just let me know if you have any ideas. Anyway, with that, we move on to the tutor lady, and I go ahead and teach Mimic to Heracross, and in hindsight, maybe Pinsir would have been a better user of it because most of the ghost types are using special type attacks, but it doesn't really matter too much. Anyway, at level 19, Pinsir gets Hardened, which I teach over Bind, and then I go into the battle against Lavrina. She leads with a Love Disc and a Beautifly, and here's the first time that we're going to notice that Heracross is a very fragile Pokemon, because we don't quite get the one-shot on Beautifly, and with a crit gust, it goes down in a single hit. In Retribution, though, Pinsir does take down the Beautifly with a crit Vice Grip, and to continue the cycle of violence, Love Disc hits me with a crit Water Gun. Now, unfortunately, I won't be able to win this fight, but I do think I might have been able to take down another Pokemon had I not gotten crit by a second water gun. So I go back into the battle again, this time poisoned with Heracross, and the reason being is that this will now guarantee that Beautifly goes down in just 2 hits. And then out comes the Roselia, now in a better place to actually get taken down quickly. Go for Horn Attack, which nearly takes it down in a single hit. Vice Grip finishes it off, bringing out her final Pokemon, which is a Shadow Delcatty. And I don't think that this is going to be too much of an issue, now that I have the extra attack. Horn Attack nearly does half to it. Vice Grip takes it down to about a quarter. I'm hurt by poison, so Heracross will go down this turn, but after taking down Delcatty. And then all that's left is the Love Disc, which takes a little less than half from Vice Grip, but as long as it doesn't get insane crit luck, I'm fine. So with Love Disc down, we beat Lavrina. But of course, you can't have a Pokemon XD Gale Darkness video without the obligatory Mirror B. How are you doing today, Mirror B? Well, it's always good to see ya. Anyway, at level 23, Heracross gets Brick Break, which is definitely a huge upgrade over Tackle. And then at the Realgam Tower, I go pick up my 2 favorite TMs, Hidden Power and Protect. And I'm going to teach Hidden Power to both right away. So, what did they end up getting? Well, Pinsir luckily got Hidden Power Electric. Not the best Hidden Power it could have got, but at least there's no ghost types that are resistant or immune to that. Unfortunately, it's only 31 base power, so it's something, but it's not great. So what did Heracross get? It got Hidden Power Fighting, which is quite possibly the worst one it could have gotten. Anyway, with that, we now move on to one of the hardest fights in the game, and that is against Fosti, the lady who dresses up as Justy inside the building. And the reason for that is mostly this Mischievous here, because it is a ghost type, and unfortunately I only have Mimic and a very weak Hidden Power Electric to actually hit it. But this Sneasel also has Aerial Ace, which does nearly half of Heracross's health every time it hits, and it does outspeed Heracross as well, so it's able to take it down quickly before I can even start dealing damage to Mischievous. On top of that, both the Kadabra and the Sneasel go for Double Team on the first and second turn, respectively, so there's a good chance I won't even be able to hit them right away. And then to finish it off, he has a Shadow Meowth that we don't even get to see. So I decide to go back to the Tutor Lady, and that's to go pick up Body Slam over Vice Grip on Pinsir, and also Substitute on Heracross, which should hopefully allow me to mimic the Sneasel before getting taken down by a couple of Aerial Aces. So with that, we go back into the battle, now the 5th attempt. And Hidden Powers are still, of course, very weak, but I'm able to set up Substitute, and eventually I'm able to get past this fight by stealing Aerial Ace. So now at level 31, Pinsir gets its own Brick Break, which I decide to teach over Focus Energy, and I go into the battle against Snaddle. He leads with a Quagsire and a Lantern, and I decide to double Brick Break into it. Now, ideally, Quagsire would have gone down to the first one, allowing me to start dealing damage to the Shadow Lunatone, but unfortunately it survives with just a sliver of health. And this is with Heracross already pre-poisoned. Now luckily I do get a crit on Lunatone, taking it down in a single hit, which then Cast Form follows by taking the second Brick Break. And then that brings out his final Pokemon, which is a Metang, and 2 Brick Breaks into it should take it down. And all that leaves is the Lantern left, who definitely cannot survive another onslaught of 2 Brick Breaks. Half health, and finish it off. Now, with nothing to really do in between, we move right along to Gonzap, who leads with an Electrode and a Nuzleaf. Now, the Nuzleaf is going to fake out on the first turn, and Electrode gets a Spark. Luckily, no paralysis. Nearly finished it off in a single Brick Break, but I think just a level or 2 would make that difference. Unfortunately, because of that, the Electrode is able to paralyze Pinsir, and so I had to finish off with another Brick Break. Unfortunately, Heracross does get paralyzed by Electrode Static, but Whiscash does come out. Now, I do need to get rid of it quickly because it is going to start using Rock Tomb to lower my speed, and also just deal a decent amount of damage to me, so it goes down. Out comes Skarmory, and hopefully a couple of Brick Breaks should be able to take it down because it does have Aerial Ace doing quite a bit of damage to Pinsir, and it will definitely take down Heracross. Another one does take down Pinsir, go for Brick Break, finishing off the Skarmory, and because I am paralyzed, I do have the Guts ability active. I decided to go for Substitute here, which was definitely the wrong move because I knew Foul Plume was going to go for Hidden Power, and unfortunately I get taken down. So back into the battle again, this time at just slightly higher level after defeating the grunts in the building. Go for body slam. Unfortunately, because Heracross was the one to get paralyzed, I am going to have Pinsir be the one to take down Electrode, which 2 body slams do it, and luckily I didn't get staticked. I go for Brick Break and Body Slam to finish off the Whiscash, thus bringing in his final Pokemon once again. But I realized that maybe Seismic Toss will actually do more than Brick Break. Unfortunately, it's not enough to actually make it a one-turn KO, but it does put it in a better position for Heracross to finish off. And then all that's left is the Vileplume, who uses Hyper Beam, which allows us a full turn to attack it and hopefully take it down, but unfortunately it does survive with just a sliver. It does get paralyzed though, meaning that we outspeed and finish it off. Now with Gonzap defeated, we climb the pyramid, and at the top we get Earthquake, which I'm going to teach over Seismic Toss. And because I now have Earthquake, I need to teach Heracross Protect, which I decide to do over Substitute. Then we go into the battle against Gorgon. He leads with Accelio and a Lairon, and because Lairon is going to Protect on the first turn, I go for Brick Break, taking Accelio down in a single hit. Then out comes Slowking, go for Body Slam into it, taking it down nearly to half health. Go for Protect and Earthquake, which should take down the Lairon in a single hit, which it does, and it actually takes down Slowking as well, bringing out his Ursaring and his first Shadow Pokemon, Primeape. And while Primeape really shouldn't be that much of an issue, I forgot to use an Ether on Heracross's Brick Break, so I am going to have to use Horn Attack to start chipping it down, which unfortunately leaves it at just a sliver of health. I take a Slash. I go for Protect and Earthquake once again. Primeape perfectly predicts which one is going to attack, but I am able to take it down and deal a decent amount of damage to the Ursaring. Luckily the Ursaring doesn't decide to attack Pinsir as well. I go for Horn Attack, finishing off Ursaring, just leaving behind the Hypno, which luckily does get taken down to half health and doesn't even go for an attack this turn. So because I know I outspeed it, I go for Protect and Earthquake and take it down. So we beat Gorgon, even though I didn't fully prepare for the fight. Anyway, at the Tutor Lady once again, I pick up Double Edge for Heracross, and then we go on to the last area of the game, where we are doing exceptionally well. However, that could change with the last few bosses, starting with the rematch against Lavrina. This time she leads with a Gorbis and a Gardevoir. I go for Brick Break into the Gorbis, not enough to take it down, and then I go for Earthquake, which does damage my Heracross. However, it is worth the risk because I'm able to take down both of her lead Pokemon, and I'm not going to be infatuated with Attract. Anyway, out comes Roselia and Farfetch'd. I can one-shot the Farfetch'd with Brick Break, then bringing out her Shadow Altaria. Go for Body Slam to finish off Roselia, that way it doesn't Leech Seed or Attract me. And then I go for Body Slam into Altaria, nearly taking it down to half, and a Double Edge finishes it off. So with that, we move on to the volcano, and we run into another Pinsir. Hello, other Pinsir. But unfortunately, it's time to say goodbye to the other Pinsir. Anyway, at level 45, Heracross gets Reversal, which is a move that deals more damage based on how much health I have. So in theory, it's better than Brick Break, but it's not nearly as reliable. At level 49, Pinsir gets the incredible move Swords Dance, so if I can set this up in some of the later fights, it will be amazing. So we go on to the battle against Snaddle. He leads with a Quagsire and a Metang this time. I go for Earthquake on the first turn, taking down Metang, and dealing a decent chunk of damage to Quagsire. Out comes Scizor, go for Brick Break to finish off the Quagsire, and then out comes his first Shadow Pokemon, Solrock. And because I don't want the Fruity Pebble set up, I'm going to take it down as quick as possible with Brick Break. And that doesn't take it down quite to half, but a second one does finish it off with Stab. Unfortunately, because I decided to prioritize the Solrock, Scizor is able to hit me with a very strong Aerial Ace, nearly taking Heracross down in a single hit. It finally goes down, and then out comes his final Pokemon, which is a Shadow Starmie. Flamethrower luckily doesn't take Heracross down, but I am burnt. So Heracross unfortunately gets outsped and is taken down immediately. Pinsir gets taken down below half. I do get a crit, but it's not enough to take down either, and unfortunately Pinsir goes down. But honestly, not too bad for a first attempt, so let's just go ahead and go right back into it again. And I realize that the Scizor is just too much of a threat to leave around, and I really don't want the Solrock setting up Shadow Sky, so I decide to double into the Quagsire to take it down, thus bringing out Scizor and Metang at the same time, so I can take them both down with an Earthquake. Which then brings out Castform, which as long as it doesn't burn me isn't that much of a threat, and Solrock, which I already know goes down to a couple of Brick Breaks, and after clicking too quick, I decide to go for Earthquake instead, which is definitely not the best choice. It's able to set up Shadow Sky, which will finish off the cast form, but unfortunately that means that Starmie is going to come out and I can't get that extra hit on it before it can attack, because it will outspeed me. So I'm put in a bit of an awkward spot, so I do think I need to play a bit more risky, so I decide to go for Swords Dance. And luckily the Starmie just goes for Shadow Mist, which doesn't do anything. Heracross is able to finish off the Soul Rock, and then all that's left is the Shadow Starmie, which I can just protect Heracross to make sure it survives, and Earthquake should be more than enough to finish it off. And luckily no crit on Pinsir either, and I take down the Starmie. Very lucky, but we got past it. Moving on to Ardos, he leads with a Shadow Swallow and Alakazam, and it sets up Shadow Sky on the first turn, and Alakazam actually outspeeds both of us. Alakazam does go down to a Body Slam. Swallow isn't quite a one-shot, which unfortunately means that it is going to go for Shadow Half this next turn, so I protect with Heracross to preserve its health. It goes for Shadow Half, which also means that Kingdra's health is lowered, so I go for Earthquake, getting the KO on it. And then out comes Heracross, which, hello other Heracross. Anyway, I go for Brick Break and Swords Dance, which finishes off the Swallow, and then out comes Electabuzz. Now, because this 2 leads outsped me, I'm pretty sure that I'm going to be slower than Electabuzz as well, but it doesn't even matter because the Fruity Pebbles finish off Pinsir, and now it's a 1-on-2. The Shadow Storms are doing quite a bit of damage, and Double Edge isn't enough to finish off Heracross, so I go down fairly quickly. So back into the battle once again, right away. I decide to go for Double Edge into Swallow this time, which unfortunately doesn't do as much damage as Brick Break did, and now I take Recoil, but it was worth a shot. Alakazam goes down, out comes Kingdra, and once again the Swallow is going to go for Shadow Half. However, this time, because I don't want to lose tempo in the fight, I decide to not protect and instead go on the offensive, taking down Kingdra on this turn, and going for Swords Dance with Pinsir, which allows me to hopefully take down the Heracross in a single turn, and I can pick off the Swallow with Brick Break. So I take down Swallow, out comes the Electabuzz once again, and we go for Body Slam, which finishes off Heracross. Now, despite this looking like a much worse situation with Snorlax coming out, it is actually quite advantageous, because with Electabuzz and Snorlax on the field, the Electabuzz isn't going to attack. Instead, it's going to use Shadow Mist to lower evasiveness. That way Snorlax can pick up KOs easier. But because it decided to attack into Heracross anyway, it doesn't actually deal any damage, and so I'm able to take it down and beat Ardos on the second attempt. Now moving on to Gorgon, he leads with Slowking and Nurturing, and I'm going to go for Double Edge into Slowking to start dealing damage to it, and Swords Dance. Because Slowking is just going to use Earthquake, it really doesn't threaten either of us, because we both resist ground. So now Pinsir is at +2, go for Brick Break to take down the Ursaring, and then he sends out Aggron. And because it's more or less riskless, I decide to go for a second Swords Dance just to guarantee that any attack that might not KO will absolutely KO. So out comes Walrein, I go for Earthquake, nearly taking down my own Heracross despite it resisting it. And then out comes Poliwrath, and then I go for Protect and another Earthquake to take down the Poliwrath and the Aggron, and then all that's left is a Shadow Mr. Mime. Now, as long as this doesn't outspeed, I know I'm perfectly safe, so I decide to go for Brick Break, which takes it down to half, and Body Slam finishes it off. An easy first try. Now moving on to Eldis, he leads with a Ninjask and a Shadow Manectric, and Manectric is almost always going to set up Shadow Sky on the first turn, so I do want to get rid of it as quick as possible. Unfortunately, a Brick Break isn't enough to take it down, which is quite unfortunate because Pinsir does need as many Swords Dances as it can get to take down his next Pokemon. Brick Break finishes off Manectric. I do get paralyzed, so Heracross is going to do more damage, however it is going to be very slow. Body Slam does still do respectable damage to Salamence. Unfortunately, I didn't realize Ninjask was going to be as strong as it actually is with its Aerial Ace, so I do think I will need at least a little bit of luck for Heracross to actually survive long enough to deal the damage it needs to. Anyway, I go for Brick Break into the Flygon because at this point I need to take risks, and I decide to go for another Swords Dance, which I don't think I needed to do, and in fact I think it put me in a worse spot. But it doesn't really matter because Fruity Pebbles finished off the Heracross, who didn't even do enough damage to take down Flygon in a single hit. And Ninjask finishes off Pinsir. Now after that fight, I realized that I need to get Heracross paralyzed, and the best place to do it is just back at a gate village with these two Dustox. So I do that and then travel back to the fight once again, where now with the extra damage from Guts, takes down Manectric in a single hit. Out comes Salamence, and I go for Swords Dance, which now Pinsir is at +2. I go for Protect, and a second Swords Dance, and this time the Ninjask is actually going for Dig, which is kind of strange. Go for Body Slam, and Double Edge, which Double Edge does do quite a bit of damage to Salamence, and Body Slam finishes it off. Out comes Flygon, and at this point Heracross has already finished its job. Now that the Pinsir is at +4, it's strong enough to take down just about everything in a single hit. Out comes Shadow Marowak. I go for Earthquake, which should take it down in a single hit. It does. And then out comes his final Pokemon, which is a Shadow Lapras. And because the Lapras always sets up Shadow Sky on the first turn, even if I hadn't one-shot it, it wouldn't have mattered because it wouldn't have been attacking that turn anyway. So I decide just to go for the extra Swords Dance because the Ninjask was going to protect anyway, and finish it off with Body Slam. So now, right before I go into the final battle, I get up to level 53 where Heracross learns Mega Horn. Even though it's a bit late, I guess it does have a really good use against one Pokemon, so I decide to teach it over Reversal, and then I go into the battle against the big box legendary, Shadowgia, and we can see the awesome power that is Mega Horn. Unless it misses. Well, Body Slam does almost nothing. Another Shadow Blast, taking Heracross down to half. Mega Horn hits, dealing a sizable chunk, but not as good as I thought it would have been. But we move on from that into the final battle against Greavil. He leads with a Rhydon and Moltres. I go for Body Slam into the Moltres right away, which luckily does get a Paralysis. Double Edge isn't enough to finish it off. It hits a Shadow Fire, taking Heracross down to 2 HP. But this battle is really just a scouting battle to see how much damage I do. So I finish off Moltres with a Body Slam, and then I go for Brick Break to take down the Rhydon. But it's not quite enough, and Heracross goes down. Okay. I go for Brick Break once again, takes down the Rhydon, then out comes Tauros. Now luckily, because I do have Hyper Cutter, I don't have to worry about that defense drop, but it doesn't matter because a crit from Executor takes down Pinsir. So now we move on to attempt number 3, and I've decided to use up all my rare candies, most of those going to Pinsir surprisingly, despite it having a lower special defense stat. I think it actually handles this battle a little bit better, and the fact that it has Swords Dance just really helps it thrive. Go for Mega Horn, taking down Executor. Out comes Tauros. And honestly, the Tauros is just such a damper on Heracross that it can't really recover. However, the Tauros does give it a bit of reprieve, so it can set up Swords Dance while it's going for Shadow Sky and Shadow Hold. So I'm able to get to +4, and in the meantime, I decide to have Heracross use a Brick Break into Rhydon, even though I know it's not going to take it down in a single hit. If the situation arises where Heracross is the last one alive against Rhydon, I want to be guaranteed that I can take it down. So I decide to go for Protect and Brick Break to take down the Tauros, and just hoping that Rhydon decides to attack Heracross instead of Pinsir. Out comes Articuno. Now luckily, I know from the second attempt that I actually outspeed Articuno, so it's not really a threat at +4, so I take it down in a single hit. Then out comes Zapdos. And I'm not exactly certain if I outspeed, I take down the Rhydon, and then if I do outspeed, I win. If I don't, it has the chance to take us down, but I do outspeed, take it down in a single hit, and we beat Greavil. So how well did these two bug types do? Well, they beat the game at a time of 8 hours, 53 minutes, and 32 seconds, at level 61 for Pinsir and 54 for Heracross, with 13 feints throughout the game. So despite having the odds stacked against them in type coverage and their unfortunate hidden power types, they actually made it through quite alright. However, of course, these two had a lot of problems, the biggest being is the fact that neither of them can deal with ghost types at all until they get either Mega Horn at level 53 or Earthquake at the top of the tower right before the battle against Gorgon. Now, there were other moves to go for. I could have gone for Rock Tomb but that would require me scale Mount Battle to Area 5 to get, which seems very out of the way just to hit ghost types for a 40 base power move that is only 80% accurate. And on top of that, their typing isn't the greatest. Bug is an okay defensive type, but there's a lot of flying and fire types in the game, so it's not great, and pairing that with fighting makes those flying types much worse, and what's even more plentiful than fire types are psychic types. But despite that, these two fighting champions made it through the game very easily, I'd say, overall, despite the flaws that they had, and they find themselves in the A+ tier. So I guess with that, if you did enjoy this video, consider liking and subscribing. If you have any Pokemon suggestions, please put them down below. Thank you so much for watching, and bye!